was sitting right behind that projector thing and I couldn't see, so it was a bit hopeless. I'll sit here. That's quite good. It's like having your own little sort of little area, which is good. It's not hot, is it? It's cool. Yeah. It's just actually thinking I don't know cool. You get quite warm when you're just sitting, actually, don't you? You sort of snuggle up and then you walk around and your ear moves around you. It's quite interesting. I'm quite keen to write a story of my life. You know, but I was going to write it as a poem. And I think the story can be quite cool, actually, because you can just flush over without going to sleep. I keep on being really rude, actually. But you don't want to bore them. But we've actually had some very exciting and funny times in our lives, and I think, you know, they can be quite fun to record for us. Yeah. But you can have the skills to do it, don't you?
Rachel has a writing group here for the day in economics.
I think you just need to I think that's the first time I tried that sort of 5 years. And when I thought, just a beautiful because
socially distant. I'll just turn the ground for you. I hope to have hip surgery next Monday. Tomorrow
Nice to get it over with.
It will be, but it's a bit because I've never anything is wrong with me. You know, just suddenly, anyway, put my big girl pants on. Get on with it.
Yes, it's quite daunting, isn't it?
yeah. Taken your place, we probably
Well,
have.
especially since, like, was it not this Friday, just been before, I had to attend about 20 people there with sticks and crutches and they had a bed with a dummy man in it, all their trussed up to things, bandages and and so we had to sit there for like 2 hours and they told us every time they were going to do it. It's just like, do I really need to know all this? You know?
Yeah, some people want more information than other people.
So I was thinking years ago when I had my first child after I had my last baby, you know, you just sort of filled in the form beside the paper and they took you away and you came back and you did no idea actually what I did. Now,
And I have to tell you,
yeah.
things that might happen that you don't really want to know.
Like even having an anesthetic now, like I might have full one, and they told me be durable and they put me to sleep. a lady yesterday, and she was telling me she was a theatre assistant. She said, oh, look, the epidural. She said, you're sort of conscious, and you know, you can tell when you want some more.
Hello everybody, I'll just do a quick health and safety because we missed it on the first briefing, sorry. Jumped the gun. Oh, Amon got going quick. So, welcome to Fielding Library. If you haven't been here before, the toilets are just here on the right. And tea, coffee, water, biscuits, please help yourselves. It's out all day, so help yourself. We will have a break at 12:30 till 1, so you'll go and stretch your legs and get some yummies in the town. There are some cafes open, so that should be open. But enjoy Simon, he's come up from Wellington for us, which is really awesome. And read about blogging. Do any of you blog? Do any of you blog? You blog too? No. It's a whole new thing, isn't it? Yeah, that's great. Instant information. Alright, Simon, I'll leave you,
Yeah, cool.
leave you
Should
to
we
it.
get into it?
Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks. I'm just going to chat to you really. I got here nice and early because I was worried about all the traffic lights in Fielding. I didn't have to wait for too long, just the one set. So I just sort of took my time and sat there for a bit, just enjoyed it. I used to come to Fielding heaps, but that was 20 years ago. I used to play at the Irish pub. Was it called Murphy's? Yeah, I get confused because they're all either called Murphy's or Murray's, and we used to play at a few. It is Murray's, there you go, yeah. So JJ Murphy's is the one in Wellington, yeah. So I used to play in this Irish band, and I think when we were coming up here, Murray's was pretty brand new. I feel like it, but I could be wrong. It was new to me.
Extended.
Yeah, right, yeah. So it was. So I did a little drive-by and a little sort of reminder memory of that. And I haven't been up here much in the last wee while. I've probably driven through a couple of times, but yeah, I used to come pretty much every weekend or every second weekend for a couple of years and play, and then generally drive over to Palmerston and stay the night there and play there the next night. Sometimes just turn around and drive straight back, or do 2 nights here. It was good fun. I'm going to talk to you about blogging and what am I doing? Tips for building a blogging routine. I got them to change the title because they asked me to come and talk about how to make a successful blog. And I thought, well, not only is successful such a loaded word, I didn't want anyone asking me how they monetize their blog, because I don't know. I'm not in it to make money. I've made some money blogging, but that is not why I've ever done it. And I haven't cracked that code, so I don't want to. And I also find it really boring to talk about things like advertising and hits and stuff. I want to talk to you about writing and blogging and putting things out in the world. And so I'm going to do it in 3 parts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and who I am and how I got into blogging. Then we're going to talk about blogging, and then we can have some questions. And if your question, so long as your question is not, why is this so dumb and boring, this talk, you can ask it straight away, because I reckon it's better to ask that at the end and say, why was that so dumb? Because then I can just, now I know there's only one set of traffic lights, I can get out of here quick, and I don't have to answer that. But anything else, you can, if something stirs something in you that you want me to address or you want to comment, feel free to just stick your hand up and I'll get you to jump in and say something. So my name's Simon Sweetman. I am a blogger, I'm a podcaster, I'm a radio producer, I am a reviewer, I'm a poet, I'm a published author, I guess, or writer who's published a book of non-fiction. I don't know if that makes you an author or not. Yeah, those are the things I do, I guess. And blogging has been a thing that I have done for a long time and have been variously, I guess I've never been embarrassed about it, but I've worked through the era when people loved to call someone a blogger as if that meant they weren't really real. They weren't really a real writer. You're not a journalist, you're just a blogger. And it was like, well, actually, Dick, I was a journalist for years before blogs were even invented. And I realised that doesn't matter. Like, none of that matters. I've got into all of these different things that I've done for one reason. I enjoy writing, and it's an outlet, it's an avenue, it's a format, and it's interesting to me. What makes someone a blogger, I think, or what gives someone the idea to write opinion pieces, columns, blogs, isn't so much that you're an expert, it's that you are interested in something and you have an opinion on something. So that the thing that you become an expert on, hopefully, and I feel like everyone in this room needs to know that you have this, is that you are the expert on your own opinion. No one else knows your own opinion better. There are people who are better at putting their opinions across, absolutely. And unfortunately, there are people that think that saying that's my opinion closes off a conversation. It doesn't. It actually should open a conversation. So just thinking that your opinion cannot be changed or that you are valid for having one, that to me doesn't mean anything. But becoming the expert in your own opinion is, to me, I think what blogging has helped facilitate, what it's about. So I grew up in Hawke's Bay, and I lived in Hawke's Bay for my first 18 years, and I moved to Wellington to go to university, ostensibly, also to drink and play in bands and collect records and meet people and get in adventures, and I'm still doing most of those things. I have lived in Wellington ever since, so I've lived in Wellington for longer than I lived in Hawke's Bay. I am married, I have a child who is 8, nearly 9, and we have a dog and a cat, and we live in the Aro Valley, and most of these things have come up in my blogs in some way or other. I didn't set out to tell people about my life, my wife, my child, but it would be very boring if I only wrote about the records that I was listening to or whatever I had gone on to write about. The other thing I want to tell you before I talk specifically about blogging, I guess, is that I mentioned doing these other things and always being a writer. I don't know, because people don't buy newspapers anymore, so I don't know if this means anything ever, or if you knew this or didn't know this, but for years I was a music writer for the Dominion Post. I was a freelance writer. I guess I'm still a freelance writer, and I wrote for a bunch of publications. I was never owned by any one publication, but I did write for the Dominion Post from, or the Evening Post and the Dominion Post from, I think, 2001 until about 2016. So quite a long stretch there. And the first blog that I had was through the Dominion, well, was through the Stuff website. So I also have my own website, which is called offthetracks.co.nz, and that's where I do everything now, basically. That's my home for my writing. For a brief period of time, I was doing both. So I wrote this blog called, I was asked to do a blog for Stuff, and it was called Blog on the Tracks, and it was a music blog, and I had been this music reviewer for the Dominion Post. I had written a few other articles for them, sure. I had reviewed some books and reviewed some movies and some other cultural sort of things, pursuits, and I'd done a couple of interviews, and well, back in the day I'd written a fascinating article about barbecues for the Evening Post. That was my first published piece. I met a woman at a party who said that she wrote for the lifestyle section of the paper, and I said, I want to be published in the newspaper, and she said, well, it's not a glamour gig, but I can get you a story about barbecues. And I was like, I am there. And I didn't even care. It's become quite good, actually. I didn't even care my name wasn't on it because they paid me for it. And that was what mattered. I went to the Petone barbecue factory and interviewed the owner of, or the owner-operator of the barbecue factory, and he told me about the latest trends in barbecues. And I sat there writing notes furiously, trying to be really fascinated about it. And I think I did an okay job preparing what was essentially advertorial, but I didn't know it. I asked him questions about who he was and what he did, and then it turned it into the story that worked. And I did a couple of other housing features for the Evening Post. They were good fun. I met the people I still know to this day. They had two styles of housing features. They did, you could either go and, I think they probably still do this sort of stuff, but you could either go and write about a really flash architecturally designed home that had some element of design to it and was interesting, or you could go and interview like a Wellington personality who was quite well known and have the photographer take photos of their house. And even if it was a dump, it was suddenly an interesting story because of the person who had chosen to live in that dump. So I went in, they said, would you like to do that? Now, I was only doing this so that I could basically become a music writer for the newspaper. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do that since I was a kid. I wanted to write about what I liked and loved and thought I knew, which was music. You know, I wanted to write other things than I had, but that was the thing. So I'd been told by this woman that I met at this party that newspapers are a family, and if you get in, you're in. And so, yeah, I did the barbecue story, and then she said, have you got anyone that you know that you think would be interesting that might have a cool story and live somewhere where we could take some photos? And I said, well, there's this guy I've just met, his name's Ray Mercer, and I don't know if any of you have heard of him or know him, but he's done many great things. He was a musician, and he fixes guitars, and he has an interest in doing up cars, but this was prior to him becoming a local council member in Wellington. But he had this massive conservation background. He was interested in activism and conservation and protecting the environment. So he was instantly an interesting guy, and I only met him once. So I rang him and said, hey, could we come around? I knew he had some cool stuff in his house, like he had an acoustic guitar sitting in the corner that had been given to him by Robert Plant, the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, because he had actually been a roadie for Led Zeppelin. So I thought, if we can pull these sorts of things into the story, this is cool. So that was my first published proper piece for the paper, and it was, you know, I went out and bought 5 copies of it. I don't know how old I was. I think I was probably 22 or 3, and I bought 5 copies of it and put a copy in a post bag and sent it to my parents. And you know, I wouldn't know actually to this day if they read it, but they received it. Anyhow, I'm sure they did. Anyway, then I went and did one with did a housing story with Miranda Harcourt, who's a famous actor and acting coach and teacher, and I know Miranda reasonably well now, but I hadn't actually met her. I'd met her husband, and I got the best reply. I wrote to him, and Stuart McKenzie's a director and a writer and the very best person you could ever follow on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram at all or thinking about becoming a person who's on Instagram, write down Stuart McKenzie and look him up. He has made blogging a thing on Instagram. He takes these beautiful, he's a great photographer. He takes these beautiful photographs, but even when he takes like a boring photograph of like, no offense to these cookbooks or whatever, but maybe he'll just take a photo of that, but then he'll write a sizable story underneath it. And his story might tell you about who he is, but it might tell you about how he once had dinner with one of those writers. It might tell you the history of the Fielding Library and how there used to be heaps of traffic lights in Fielding, but they cut them all down. He will know this stuff, and you might not have known that, and he will educate you on it. So he's become this great Instagram blogger. Anyway, I had met him once. A friend had hooked me up with him and said, you want to be a writer? Stuart McKenzie's a great writer. You should have coffee with him. And I did, and he was nice. And then I wrote to him and said, hey, you were so nice, would you like it if we infiltrated your home with a photographer and took photos of where you live and asked you all these questions about who you are and why you do what you do and why you live where you live? And he wrote back with the most brilliant answer and said, I knew Miranda was his wife, by the way, but he wrote back with the most brilliant answer, which is, no thank you, this absolutely terrifies me. I have no interest in this at all. However, my wife, Miranda Harcourt, has a sort of vanity where she would love to have people in her house and talk to her about what she does. She's an actor, you know, and we've just had a baby, and she would consider this work, so it would be our honour. So I went to their house and met their now famous daughter, Thomason, who's in all these movies. I met her when she was about 3 weeks old, I think, or 2 weeks old. She was, you know, just being held there. And talked to them about their house. They've got an amazing art collection, and that became the second published story. So after I had that as a track record, I was able to go to the newspaper and ring them and write to them and say, please let me write some music reviews for you. I'm in the family. I've done a couple of published articles for you. That didn't go anywhere, so I just emailed this guy one day who I thought was in charge of the music reviews and wrote the world's rudest email, which was, especially the world's rudest email as job application. I said, who writes your record reviews? They're all terrible. You guys are shit. You're all terrible, lazy journalists that just want free CDs. You're quite good. Your reviews are good. I like yours, but everyone else is terrible. I know way more than any of them, and I'll do a way better job. Why don't you have me? And then I guess my 22 or 23-year-old logic was they'll write back and tell me to, you know, please go in that direction. Without saying it so politely. Or maybe I'll get a job out of it. And I was so new to email that I had actually forgotten that I had an email signature at the bottom with my cell phone number. So about 2 minutes after sending that thing, I got a phone call, and the guy basically said, all right, if you think you're so flash hot, why don't you come in here now, we'll give you a pile of CDs that we don't want, and we'll give you a week to write about them. And I was like, great. Jumped in the car, drove from Island Bay into the Evening Post headquarters, and found this guy, and at his desk was a stack of about this many CDs, and they were terrible. They were 90s dance music compilations, commercial hip-hop. The big trend at the time was white rappers because of Eminem, but this was all the white rappers that weren't Eminem, i.e. they were shit. And so it was all this stuff that they had no interest in, that they'd been getting sent. This is back in the day when record companies had heaps of money, back when there were record companies, back when there were CDs, back when there was music journalism. And so they said, take all of these CDs and you have 1 week to write 135 to 160 words about as many of these as you can. And I reckon there was 35 CDs. And I stayed up for 3 nights listening to this stuff over and over. I was working in a record store, so I was into music, and I'd always been into music, and we'll get to that. But I reckon I turned it around in 2 or 3 days. I do remember that I saved them to a floppy disk and drove it and handed the disc. So I'm making this sound so much more archaic than it was, but I drove in and handed the guy a disc, and I said, oh, here's some reviews. And he goes, great, how many did you do? I said, I did all of them. And he's like, oh, this was sort of like a test. We were hoping to never hear from you again. We just thought you'd get home and listen to the first one and put it in the bin. And I said, no, it was great fun. I loved it. Where's the next pile? And he kind of went, well, you've sort of exhausted the cupboard, but here's 3 or 4. Please take a lot longer with these. Don't rush back, and we'll get through these. And lo and behold, they started publishing these reviews that I wrote, and over the next several weeks, quite a few of them turned up. They used to do a whole page of album reviews back then. I think it was on a Thursday. We moved around a bit. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday was one of those days. But anyway, they would do a whole page. And so sometimes I have 5 or 6 reviews in there. So I started to get a little bit known from doing that, I guess. And then I was doing music reviews for North and South magazine, and I was, what else? Doing a few other things. Not really anything online. But then I became one of the music reviewers for the Good Morning TV show, which was a different thing altogether, because I've barely got a face for radio, let alone TV. So this was never my thing. But when they asked me if I'd go and do a screen test for it, it was like, yeah, this is a different thing about reviewing. This is completely different, and it was. It became, and so I did that for a long time, about 10 years, until they moved Good Morning back up to Auckland, and then mothballed it a couple of years after that. So that became a fun experience. So I guess what I'm getting to is that in all of this experience of commenting about music non-stop, and I got a gig doing like 5 minutes a week talking on News Talk ZB, not about music. Can you believe it? They let me talk about whatever I wanted. You're probably wondering how I could have filled the time. I went for it. It was great fun, and I did that for about 7 or 8 years, I think, talking to the late great Gary Ward, who I've written down here the best thing he ever told me, which became a really, really good maxim for, if not blogging, then certainly publishing opinion pieces, which I've done, and then moved into blogging, which in a way is the ultimate form of opinion piece. He said, golden motto, kid, golden rule, never complain, never explain. And I don't know if that was his maxim or someone else's, but he's not around to get done with plagiarism, so I'll attribute it to him. But he was wonderful, and I loved that idea. That's the confidence that you have to have. I said at the start, that you're all expert in your own opinion. So be humble and be prepared to be pulled up on when you get something wrong when you're publishing blogs and opinion pieces, sure. But you shouldn't have to justify why you've done it. That's what I took from the never complain, never explain. And I've had this, I think, healthy, borderline unhealthy approach to allowing comments on things and not letting them get to me, because that's an important thing. So I was doing all of this stuff, and then I got asked, or no, I asked if I could do a blog for Stuff. They had just tentatively put the toe in the water with blogs, and a few people had been writing to me over the last couple of years at the time saying, why aren't you doing a music blog? Why do we only get to read what you write about music once a week? You should have your own site, you should be doing a blog, blah, blah, blah. So I thought, I'll ask this guy. So I wrote to this guy, toning down my approach from when I emailed the guy in charge of the music reviews. I changed my tone slightly and wrote to this guy and said, who's in charge of the Stuff blogs? They're all fantastic. They're all amazing. I'd love to be part of this family. You're all so good. Would you please, would you be interested at all? And I noticed you don't have a music blog. And he wrote back, well, it got forwarded to the person who was in charge, who wrote back to me and said, this is really good timing. You're on my list of people to talk to. We do want to have a music blog, and your name came up straight away, and we would like you to do it. So that became a blog called Blog on the Tracks. I came up with the name because I loved the Bob Dylan album, Blood on the Tracks, and I thought it was actually a really clever pun, and a lot of people thought it was a really stupid pun. I love the fact that we each have our own opinion on that. So I called that Blog on the Tracks, and I decided really quickly, this was late 2007, and so blogs were pretty fresh then, certainly in terms of mainstream media in New Zealand. I decided pretty quickly that I would do it every day. I would do it from Monday to Friday, because they said, the golden rule of blogging is you need to be regular. People need to learn about you, and they need to know when to expect that they can read this stuff. So you need to turn up, a couple of times a week. And I thought, a couple of times a week is the worst thing ever, because then you let Tuesday slide and it becomes Thursday, and then you think, I'll catch up next week and I'll do 3. What if I create a daily deadline for myself? What if from Monday to Friday I have to do something? This will become my writing exercise. I was still writing reviews, still on TV, doing things for an insane period there in, I think, 2010. I was also writing for the Herald under a fake name because I wasn't allowed to write for both papers. So I was writing film reviews, interviews with international musicians, like people like Ozzy Osbourne and stuff. And it was really funny because I was like, how do you do this? How do you have a fake name? I'd grown up loving Stephen King and finding out about Richard Bachman, his pen name, and how he just loved being busted on it. And I thought, how do you do this? How do you... So I would just interview people as Simon Sweetman, and then the article would just come out as Mark Reed, and I just never explained, never complained, never explained. Nothing ever got said about it. I picked the most generic sounding name I could, I guess. Like, there was no story in it at all. It just seemed like a name no one would question, and they did it for about a year until they did, and then I stopped. Anyway, so I was doing all this other stuff, but the main thing, I guess, in terms of visibility was the Stuff blog. It's hard for it not to be when they put your fucking face there every day on the website. So, I never signed up for that, but it became the reality. So then I started getting recognised in the street for writing things, which is a very weird thing, because why would people care? But you also think, isn't it wonderful that they do? I guess that started when I was on Good Morning TV, and at the end of the first year of that, me and my wife and a friend of ours were standing in Lambton Quay, and a woman came up to me, and I don't think she's here, so I can say this, she looked really nervous and said, can I ask you a question? And I thought, I really wasn't following the signs, and I thought she was going to say, why are there so many traffic lights in Wellington, or I'm from Fielding, or where is the nearest cafe, whatever. And I said, yeah, sure. And then she got more and more nervous, and she goes, I'm thinking about buying a CD for my husband. And my wife and her friend just started laughing and walked off, because they had seen this unfolding, and I just had him. And so I had this nice chat to this person and recommended some things, and then she left, and Katie and our friend Sarah were just like, that is hilarious. And I said, I don't really know why that happened or how that happened. And they were like, well, it's happened because you're on Good Morning TV. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess so. And I really, it was like that. I really didn't click to it. But flash forward a year or two later, and when your face is on a Stuff, the national website really at the time where people got their news, whatever you think of Stuff, and I certainly think they were awful now, then still it has that visibility, you can't hide from it. So I started getting asked stuff all the time. I started getting asked questions about things. People had a real ownership on, when are you going to write about this? Why are you going to, why have you written about that? It wasn't just confined to the comments section. The comments section was its whole other thing altogether. The comments section of the stuff blogs used to be moderated. They did try to, and then I think like any cutback in journalism, it became very expensive to pay for people to sit in the weekend and moderate comments. So the comments got worse, and then the comments disappeared. And most websites and blogs to this day now have decided to do away with comments. It's the smartest thing to do. I did away with comments on my own site. I can't remember when, but basically in line with things like the Spin-off doing away with them. It wasn't, it was just me moderating them, and I didn't get that many that I couldn't, and I let them all go up. But I just thought, this seems to be a trend. I liked it too, getting rid of them after a while too, because it forced people to interact with the article rather than just leave what they think is their smart, pithy comment without reading it. And the other thing that happened was the big integration of social media. So you share your blog on Facebook, and then the conversation erupts on Facebook, and the people that are having the conversation on the blog is suddenly this splintered audience, where this faithful audience that are on the blog aren't hearing the comments, or are copying and pasting their comment from there and putting it on Facebook. So suddenly you're making a whole lot of work for everyone else, not just for yourself. It seems silly. So I did the blog for Stuff from 2007 until 2015, I think. I got cancelled by Robbie Williams, basically. I wrote a review of a Robbie Williams concert, and he was very unhappy with me. He got someone to read it to him, I think, I imagine, and he got very upset. And it made news around the world, actually, and I got asked to comment on all sorts of things from regular TV and radio through to Stuff. Stuff wanted me to be interviewed about it. And I had to say to the arts editor of Stuff, I write for you 5 times a day. If I wanted to write about Robbie Williams, I would just do it. I would just do it as part of my blog. So I think the fact that I haven't done that suggests I don't really want to talk about it. What do you think? And she said, well, we'd love to have a piece of content from you about it. And I said, cool, I'll do that tomorrow. And then I just sent in a record review of Warren Zevon or something, just completely ignored it. Because there was a really interesting line of, like, I've given a lot about myself and my family over the years, but when someone else had given a whole lot of stuff about myself and my family, I don't know if you need the full context for this or if you want it, but I'm happy to give it to you. But anyway, basically, there was a line I had to draw where I was like, well, I won't comment on this. My wife got very upset about that, so that was the moment that I realised, oh yeah, this little rinky-dink hobby of mine that pays a little bit of beer money from time to time has a weird impact. Outside of that, it's mostly been really, really good. It's been really good. I started my own website in 2012 called that offthetracks.co.nz because I had blog on the tracks, and I thought off the tracks will be my home for anything else. And I won't do daily blogs on Off the Tracks. I will write record reviews on there, and I will write book reviews on there. And then I don't know how this happened, but I started publishing some of the poems that I wrote on there. I know how the poetry happened. That had always been there. I'd written poems from the age of about 12 or 13 certainly. But I think it happened because I wrote a couple that were to do with music, and I thought these can be on there. This audience that has kind of grown up with me writing blogs all the time and getting in their ear or in their eyesight, they might like a poem about this musician. I don't know if they did, but they got it. And then I thought, well, why draw the line? Why not share some other poems as well? So the poems have become a feature for me of the website, and I put lots of poems up there, and they all sort of make it up there eventually. And I've started now, because I don't do the Stuff blog anymore, I have started doing blogs about music again, like a daily blog. If I want to write about, this week was the 30th anniversary of a Neil Young album that I like. Now, are you going to read about that in the newspaper? Of course you're not. You're not even going to read about it in Uncut magazine because they barely publish anymore. So this is an album I've loved for 30 years, and it's not that well known in its catalogue. That's perfect blog opportunity for me to write something about that. And I got some really nice feedback from people about that. That's where you find I think that's where you find the people, you suddenly feel a little bit less alone in the world. You find people that know stuff and are interested in the same stuff as you. And that was the great thing for me about blogging was I wrote down here, define the topic that you are blogging, but don't let it define you. And I think that was my goal. And then a couple of weeks later, I would have had to scratch the second bit of that out because I got known as a music blogger. But I'm constantly trying to write about different things on my site as well, but keep the music stuff going. So I will write about a lot more about films these days, a lot more about books, and then I'll occasionally do things like little travel diaries. Like a couple of times the family's been to America, I'll share photographs and do things like that and write more that way. So it's become a bit of a personal journal. But yeah, the only time I really ever questioned the sharing of personal life was around that Robbie Williams thing. I kind of had to just draw it in. The good news is there's a poem about it in my upcoming poetry book, so the statute of limitations has passed on that, and I feel very good about A, slipping that plug in, and B, the fact that the poem exists and the whole story exists in the frame of that poem, really.
Can you tell us a little bit of the context of that Robbie Williams?
Yeah, sure. I went to Robbie Williams because no other person, everyone else knew that it would be terrible. And so I went as the reviewer. I went as a job. I went as the reviewer for the Dominion Post. He played at the Basin Reserve, and it was newsworthy because they hadn't had gigs there for a long time, and he had been the first person to open the stadium, play a gig at the stadium. So he was returning for the first time. To diminishing returns audience-wise, obviously. But it was still a big deal that he was a repeat customer. So I went along and went to the gig. Now, I've never been a Robbie Williams fan, but I have many times in my life been a person who has worked in a music store. So I've listened, and I was there when he skyrocketed in fame. So I've listened to a lot of Robbie Williams music, more than I ever would have wanted to, of course. So I knew the stuff. And so I went, and look, I've been into a Nana Muscuri concert and not only survived it and I'm here today, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so I want to put that across because, like, I think it's probably less likely I would have loved Nana Muscuri than Robbie Williams. So I'm all about going and experiencing things and being blown away by them in the moment. So I went there with the idea, I actually went there a little bit excited, thinking, that'd be great if he seems like a bit of a cheeky chap. He might be really fun to see live. I thought he was terrible. I thought musically he was embarrassing, probably one of the worst vocalists I've ever watched live. And to top it off, he encored by doing Bohemian Rhapsody. And it's kind of like, well, if you really want to prove you're a terrible vocalist, right, sing that song, because no one, why have there been not many covers of that song in this world? For a good reason. So he did that, and then, when he really started to struggle, he just sort of handed the microphone out for the crowd to sing. I wrote a review saying that he was terrible. I'm not about to quote the review, I can't remember it entirely, but it had some savage lines in it, which I think is allowed. And they were good fun. They were fun to write. I think I said something like, when he did a cover of Bohemian Rhapsody, it was a bit like someone sneaking into an art gallery and drawing a smile on the Mona Lisa with crayons. Something like that. So, I thought they were quite good lines, actually. Evocative, and showed what a terrible crime had been perpetrated. So I handed this review in, wrote it on the night and emailed it, and I had 15 years of reviewing gigs, and I don't think I'd ever had an answer in an email from any editor, apart from occasionally, thanks. It's always a one-word, thanks. Occasionally it might have been, great, we'll run that tomorrow because you got it in on time. I sent an email to the person, and she wrote back and said, holy shit, which I thought, fantastic, that means it's going to play really well. It was Labour weekend, and the review went off because we'd already switched to a mode then where reviews actually went online before they went into the paper. So the review was up first thing in the morning, and Robbie Williams fans were very angry that someone who clearly was not a fan had poked fun at their boy and whatever. And then Robbie Williams went to someone got Robbie Williams to go to my website, where the cover photo was me holding my son when he was about 5 months old, at Slowboat Records at an in-store watching a performance my wife had said, that's a really lovely photo, someone had sent it to us, you know, it wasn't a posed photo, I didn't know it had happened, and my wife said, that's a really lovely photo, we should use that as the cover image for your website, as the banner. So I was up there for a long time, and he took that photo and tweeted it out to his 2 million followers and just wrote, Simon Sweetman, baby eater. And so the thing that I found funniest about it, or saddest about it, that I didn't comment on until a year later, when I was asked to write a piece about it for the spin-off, was in the concert, he had done this big spiel about how someone had photographed his children in a park, and he had gone up like a proud dad and said, don't do that, or I'll take the camera off you and I'll throw it in the bin. My children are sacred. No one should share photos of people's children unless they want them to. And the crowd cheered. Now, a percentage of that crowd also retweeted his photo he stole from my website and his comment that he made about me, sadly, not winning Slimmer of the Year once again. So that set off a situation where it went ballistic, actually. And so my review got chopped up into several different lines and shared around the world by lots of different sites. A lot of them enjoyed it. A lot of them were like, you know, this is what Robbie Williams reacted to, and here is the actual review. And someone did a comparison of like, they were like, let's count all the zingers, and they'd broken down each line and, you know, given me a point for each time I'd said something that had obviously really hurt him and stuff like that. But then they had somehow got the number and run the house. They're an Australian site, and they wanted me to talk to them. And so 3 days into it, yeah, my wife, who just leads it, I mean, apart from making a terrible decision in life to marry me, she leads a pretty quiet life and just does her work and is a nice person. So she found it pretty confronting to, as the mother of a small child particularly, you know, like not only is her husband being picked on, she sort of knew I could handle it. And I guess that was the tricky thing, was that someone else was being brought into it that never asked to be brought into it, which arguably is, on some level, is my fault. If the photo was never on my site, then the person couldn't grab it. But that's where I really recognised that, like, man, you end up giving a lot of yourself in this situation without knowing it, without knowing that you're arming people for... So this went on for... my thing to Katie was like, maybe we need to get a PR person, maybe we need to talk to a lawyer, and I was like, we just don't need to talk to anyone. And it'll go away in 48 hours. And in 72 hours it hadn't gone away and it got worse. And in about, I'm not good at maths, but a day or two later, it was still raging. And I reckon it took about a week. And then it still comes up to this day, actually. I still randomly will get sent that original tweet from a Robbie Williams fan going something like, have you changed your opinion yet? And I just write back and say, no, I haven't. Or occasionally, if I'm feeling like, I go, yes, I have actually. I've gone out and bought all his albums. They're amazing. And then I'll just name like a Tom Waits song. And just my favourite song is actually this. And they'll, you know, I've even had this whole conversation with the person who was like, I haven't heard that. Did he do a cover of that? And I was like, it's really hard to find. So I had a bit of fun. I've had a bit of fun sometimes. But then you wonder why you were doing that exactly. So my main thing has been to not engage with that until a year later, when the spin-off was actually getting me to write a column about being a dad for their parenting section that they had. I knew the editor of the parenting section. She's a good friend of mine, and she asked if I'd do it. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to do that's not about music, that's something else. And they were the hardest columns that I ever wrote. I only did about 4 of them, and they were I probably took the most pleasure from feeling like I was finished with them. One of them ended up it's Emily Wright. She's quite a well-known activist and writer and blogger, and she published a collection of the columns, and one of them that I wrote is in that book. So that was a really cool, proud moment for that to be in there. But one of the columns I did was the impact of the Robbie Williams concert on me and my wife as a parent, and I basically that's really what got me fired from Stuff, was writing that column. Stuff felt very upset that I had given the scoop roughly 13 months later to another organisation, and fired me via email after about 16 years of service to them. So yeah, that was the end of that. lots of time to concentrate on my blog, which was great. And so the last few years have been focused on Off the Tracks and trying to develop more things out of that. And I guess the big thing in the last 5 years has been doing a weekly podcast. And so I interview writers, musicians, artists, filmmakers, anyone who's doing something creative that I'm interested in general. There are a couple of people here that I've actually talked to for that podcast, so that's pretty cool. I do one every week. It's called Sweetman Podcast. It's on the Off the Tracks site, and it's wherever you get podcasts. I never thought that I would sit and have lunch with Suzanne Vega and have her on my podcast, so some pretty cool things have happened from it. The first cool thing was, for me, was going to Melbourne. Well, I should say I was going to Melbourne anyway, but when I got to Melbourne, after months of arranging it, I sat in the room with Phil Judd, who made the greatest album to ever come out of New Zealand, in my opinion, Mental Notes by Split Ends, and he also just happened to write a little pop song that you might know called Counting the Beat, and is very reclusive and doesn't give interviews, and I have for about 15 years built a relationship with him where I've had a few interviews with him, including this one on the podcast that I did now about 3 or 4 years ago, which is probably the single greatest thing I feel like I've done in terms of journalism. And in terms of feeling like I was a journalist, a broadcaster, I felt like my own producer. I spent the day having to reassure him that A, we would have a good chat and people would like it, and that B, if he really didn't want to do it, and I just left Melbourne having met him for the day and had lunch with him, I was super okay with that. In the background going, fuck, please no, do the thing. But also, honestly, this guy's nerves around doing this were unbelievable. To the point where, as a, I think, 60-year-old man he was at the time, or 62 or so, saying to me, would it be all right if I have a beer while we do this chat? Yeah, sure. He's like, will you have a beer with me? Yeah, of course, I'm on holiday, Phil, I'll have a beer. I've only got 2, they're in the fridge. Is it all right if we sit and have these 2 beers together, and then I'll pretend that the tape recorder's not on? Not only is that okay, Phil, we can just go and have the chat with the beers, and I can show you that the batteries have been taken out and the tape recorder's not on. And this tennis match went on for hours. And then I recorded the interview for about 1 hour talking to him. And I walked out of his house. He lives in a pretty remote location. I don't know Melbourne very well, but he lives quite far out. I've got a taxi out there. And I ordered a taxi to get back in. And I felt like sort of, punching the roof of the taxi. I just felt like I was on a cloud 9, really. And that earned me no money. And will earn me no money. And it might have earned me an angry email from Phil. It could have. It didn't. Actually, the opposite. He was chuffed because people from his past wrote to him and said how wonderful it was to hear his voice in the world again. So I've really enjoyed that, because that's been a chance to, much as I'm just talking non-stop to you as I do, that's been a chance for me to really get into sharing other people's voices, which has always been part of my blogging. I've always done guest blogs. I've always asked people to contribute something. I've always entertained it when someone writes to me and says, I've got an idea. I can't be bothered doing a blog, hosting a blog. I've only got one story. Will you publish it? Absolutely. I'll have a read of it and I'll share it. And then actually going to people and saying, hey, why don't you write about the time that you did this, or why don't you tell me about your 5 favourite albums, and you write about it from your point of view. And so I'll always do that, and have always done that. But moving into the podcast has allowed me to more overtly share other people's voices, and I guess probably share how much of a fan I am of stuff, not just music, writing, writers, filmmakers. And how interesting it is to talk to people, how interesting it is to get someone's story and find out about the things that they have done. I take it as a massive badge of honour when I do 2 podcasts in a row featuring me talking with poets, and I get a reply from a long-term listener that says, I made it through both of those. It scared me that they were poets, back to back. What are you trying to do to us? But I listened to them, and they were great. And it was like, well, of course they're great. These were conversations with Ben Brown and Rachel McAlpine. How could they not be great? But that's a valid thing for a person to say. Poetry is damn near as scary as jazz. And I love jazz, and I love scaring people about that stuff. But so that's been the thing. I've kept that going for the last 5 years, every week, apart from during the lockdown, I decided to not go down the path of doing Zooms and stuff. And during the lockdown, I kept writing. I kept putting things out into the world, and a couple of times people would put on Facebook post, no one cares about this, everyone cares about the daily updates, everyone's worried about this. And then I would just leave it, and someone would write underneath, actually the chance to read about something else is really nice. And most of those conversations that people end up having and that you end up being a bit of a conduit for one way or another, they're quite healthy. There's a little bit of name calling can sometimes enter into it, and that's ugly. But for the most part, I'm talking on my page, 90% of the time, I just go, man, how cool is it that there are people as mental as me when it comes to loving stuff? Like, there are people that are as passionate about this stuff as I am. So I reckon you can write a blog now that just exists on Facebook. I don't think you need a website. I don't think you need a blogging platform. I know of some examples of it where people, there's a guy I know, and I'll tell you his name, you can look him up. He's not anybody, he's not a famous person. His name's Alan Stewart. I don't know, some of you might know him. He's just a guy who's lived in Wellington for a long time. He was one of the first people I interviewed for my podcast. I think he was episode number 10, and I've done over 200. I knew he was a smart guy and he was into music, but what I loved about what he did was he wrote 50 and 100 word capsule reviews of albums he was listening to and concerts he'd been to, and particularly films that he was watching. Just as you would say on your Facebook page, oh, stink, it's raining today. His status update would be, we re-watched the 1992 Dracula. It's held up very well, blah, 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 blah. Or I have just listened to Keith Jarrett for the first time in 35 years. My wife is in tears. She has never listened to him. It's not too late for either of us. And the stuff is beautiful. And he's giving a lot of himself doing that. And I sometimes have a go at doing that myself. I sometimes think, well, my Facebook page today is just going to be a photograph of something, and I'm going to write. I'm not going to post it as an article. It's not going to exist anywhere else. It's just going to be in this moment, and it's going to be 50 words or 100 words. And I feel like that sort of microblogging is as valid now as wasting your time doing because I've done a 3,000 word interview with Sonny Rollins, and it's been one of the most important things I've ever done. And the first comment on it was, too long, didn't read. And and I thought that was wonderful. I just thought that was so funny, because that says more about that person than Sonny Rollins or me. But it's kind of valid too, if that's what the person wants to put out in the world. And I just think that's so funny. But I could write 200 words saying that I think, or I could write 50 words or less comparing Aldous Harding to a goat singing, which I did. And I posted a video of goats on YouTube shrieking, and literally just wrote, everyone loves the new Aldous Harding album. I just hear this, and embedded a video clip of goats. And I probably shouldn't have done that. Like that upset a few people, and a lot of people got very angry about that. But I thought it was funny and valid, frankly. But that got way more engagement, and took me far less time than interviewing a living legend who has just turned 90 and is still making music and still alive, and told me over the phone about doing heroin with Miles Davis, which is not a good thing to do. But if you are going to do heroin, folks, who would you do it with? I'm not advocating for drugs, but if you can say in your story, I only did heroin once, but it was with Miles Davis. I mean, that's a king-making story, right? And so he had, what I'm getting at is he had stories you cannot get from anyone else, and you can't believe you are hearing them. I just about put the phone down, I just about fell over like I've been knocked in the face. It's like, what happened? I just spent 90 minutes talking to a guy I've been listening to since I was 12 years old that plays the saxophone better than anyone. How has this happened? So my life's been like that. It's never been like, why am I not getting paid $500 to do this, or $1,000 to do this, or $80 to do this? It's like, how has this happened? And it's happened because it's been foremost in my mind since I was about 8 or 9 years old, that music and books and movies mean as much to me as anything else, just about, going. And that when I want to concentrate on them, that's what's important about them, but that I will always sort of give over to, important family time and stuff like that. my phone. I think my phone's actually on. No, I did turn it off. For example, like when I turn my phone off, it's off. When I am not looking at my phone, I'm not looking at my phone. But I wrote down that if you are experiencing a moment and you are thinking about the blog that you will write, then you're not actually experiencing the moment. You know, and that's been a thing that I've had to think about a lot. A couple of times I've caught myself going, I also make a good blog. And I think, well, and I think in some way that's a thing that all writers wrestle with. Like, you know, writers have to work from memory a lot. And so you can't really go out and manufacture what's going to become a good memory, and you shouldn't. But it's good to be aware of it, absolutely, to be aware at the time. My thing has always been like, people have said, how do you come up with a topic every day? And it's like, well, you know, is the internet finished? Did anyone read the dictionary in its entirety? Like, this stuff is infinite. Like, how can you restrict yourself to just a single topic in a day? And I try to do that thing where sometimes, you know, when you read a poem and it's about one thing, but actually it's not, it's very secretly and cleverly about something else altogether. Well, I'm terrible at that. My poems generally are like, they tell you in the title what they're going to be about, and they roll through and that's what they're about. But some of my blogs, posts, have actually led you to believe they're about one thing and they're actually about another altogether. I wrote a blog post that I loved very much many years ago about Billie Holiday, because I love Billie Holiday. But actually it was a blog post about what a wonderful writer Lindsay Rabbit is, and how something that Lindsay Rabbit had written about Billie Holiday had pretty much moved me to tears on a level that really only her voice does, and it was this perfect synchronisation. I wrote a blog about 5 years ago and repurposed it just recently and reshared it. In fact, I think I turned it into a poem even, about Peter Gabriel. And you might believe, reading it, that it's about Peter Gabriel and that it's about the song Don't Give Up. But it's actually about artistic grit, and it's actually about the fascinating thing that happened and how I listened to the song completely differently when I found out that Peter Gabriel wrote that song not wanting Kate Bush to sing it with him, but wanting Dolly Parton to sing it with him. And how just thinking about that, and there is no version of it that I know of, she turned him down for whatever reason, and what a handy replacement to have in your back pocket. Oh, we'll just get Kate Bush. That's quite good, because they were friends that had worked together already. Some people think of that song as being a Kate Bush song or being important because of her performance. What became important to me about that song is, why had he wanted Dolly Parton to do it? And why had she not because she's not good, she's wonderful, but why had that been his focus? And why had she said no? And the closest thing I think you can get to a version of it with Dolly Parton and Peter Gabriel singing is there is a version in this world of the song Don't Give Up that's covered by Willie Nelson and Sinead O'Connor. And if you haven't heard that, write that down or commit that to your memory bank and go and look that up, because it's a different song altogether, yet it's completely and utterly recognisable as the song. So I like doing that sort of stuff. I once wrote a blog about, that is actually a short story that I made up completely, about the idea that Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins had won a writer-in-residency scholarship and was stuck in a purgatory at the Havelock North Public Library. And the idea was that Billy Corgan couldn't relate to the people of Havelock North at all, and they couldn't relate to him, but they were really proud of the idea that a famous rock star was living there. And you might know now that Amanda Palmer, the musician, is stuck in Hawke's Bay because of the pandemic, and I feel like she's living out the story that I wrote about 10 years ago. I had no purpose for this story, so I just shared it as a blog post. And the first comment on it was, question mark, question mark, question mark. Like, you know, like, what the fuck is this? We came here for music reviews. What are you doing, you idiot? And so I thought that was wonderful. So I occasionally do things like that. I occasionally like to mix it up and do different things. I think if you just published a review or a comment on an album every day or a gig, it would be very boring. But if you can do a nice little surprise and have someone thinking, you know, what are you on about? Like, why did you want to do that? I think for me, the concern that comes with the title of blogging is that idea that someone thinks that you must know something. And it's like, I'm actually writing to find out. That's why I've been writing, not because I know. I mean, I do know something. I know that I'm an expert in my own opinion. I know that. But what am I going to do with that? I'm writing to find out. I'm writing to know things. I am writing to share what I know and to share of myself. and I'm writing because I dare to, and you know, if I don't do it, then it won't happen, and it's really that simple. And
Simon, do you ever question your opinion? Do you ever think, I feel like the answer is no.
well, I am now.
Because I'm asking.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mary.
As you write, before you do the post thing, sometimes do you think, do I or should I?
Yeah, not enough according to my wife. You know, you really shouldn't have said that. Used to be the hot dinner topic. Yeah, no, I do sometimes, and I think that, you know, one thing I wanted to touch on was the idea that it's really cool to admit when you're wrong. It's really cool to republish, to rework, to revise, to reshape. And the number one question I have pretty much always been asked when I have talked to anyone about any kind of writing to do with reviewing, which is essentially where it's all stemmed from for me. You know, blogging's been an extension of reviewing for me. Has always been, you know, what's an example of an album you hated when you first heard it and you said bad things about it, but now you really like it? Or the reverse, what's an album you raved about? And it's far more common that you rave about things in the moment and then you revisit them and go, oh, so what? You know, that's actually not that, it's not terrible, but it's not that flash. That record that I just said was probably going to be one of the albums of the year. I don't remember listening to it now. So there's a bit of that. I can't give a good example of, I can never give a good example of something happening the other way. The best example I can give at the moment of not getting something wrong, but being not interested in something at all and thinking it had nothing to offer, and then changing my opinion on that just recently, would be some of the work of Lana Del Rey. I have been really uninterested in her and thought she was borderline not valid. I really didn't like her albums. I thought what she was giving the world, to me, had been done before, and it seemed like it was fake. And then I heard her album that she released late last year, and I thought that it was wonderful. I think the writing is there, more than it's ever been. I think she's an amazing example of like a modern day torch ballad singer with incredible writing. Her lyrics now feel like they could be little short stories. And I thought it was so poetic. And then just a couple of months ago, there was news that she's releasing a book of poetry. They are not lyrics, they're actual poems that she's written. And the book is due out any day now, I think maybe next month actually, but you can get the book as an audiobook. She's released it as an audiobook first. And so it's on Audible. So I did the free Audible trial and stayed on there for just long enough before I disappeared and took my credit card number back. But I did listen to the album a bunch, the spoken word album, and that's wonderful too. So I've become a convert to this woman who I think had released 4 albums that I really didn't like and had made myself listen to. Actually, but the thing is, I think sometimes there was always something there that I was trying to find. You know, it's the things that you just dismiss and go, that's not for me. I'm not the target market for that, that's fine. It's always interesting, the things where you're like, why don't I like this? You know, it becomes a very fine line. Why don't I like this? Why do I keep listening to this if I don't like it? Maybe I do like it and I just can't work out why. That becomes a very interesting thing. I think she's always been in that camp for me. I could never quite just dismiss her. But I did a couple of times write negative reviews of her albums, and she has the craziest fans in the world because I was on a school trip about a month ago, and my phone dinged in my pocket and the kids were running around because it was lunchtime, and I thought, okay, I'll catch up on these dings in my phone. It's been going heaps, what's happening? And it was a bunch of angry Lana Del Rey fans telling me off about a review I wrote. And I thought, I haven't reviewed her for years. And I clicked on, one of them had shared the link, and I had written about her album in 2010. And people in July of 2020 were yelling at me about it. So I don't take anything from that beyond the idea that, you know, we're no longer writing tomorrow's fish and chip paper. Like, you know, that used to be the saying and the case with newspaper reviews, and it used to be very much true. But you write this stuff and you put it out in the world and you forget about it and move on, which you should. But people find it when they want to, and that has both really good and really potentially quite bad. The thing that's bad about it is if you want to be that person, you can lose a day to answering people on social media. And I just won't do that anymore. I have occasionally, and I think the Robbie Williams thing was probably a real turning point in that, of just, these people are angry and crazy on a level that you can't ever Because I've always been really interested and open to the idea of stating my case to people. I've had people come up to me in public. I've had the best thing that's happened to me, not once but twice, is I've been introduced to a person at a gig, and they've started shaking my hand, and they said, "Oh, this is my friend Simon," and they've started shaking my hand, and then I felt the hand slip away, as they've said to my face, "You're not Simon Sweetman, are you?" And I felt the hand slip away, so I've sort of held on to it, and sort of kept shaking it like a little doily, and said, "Yes, yes, I am. It's really nice to meet you." Or I've let them pull the hand away, but I've chatted to them, and I think in some sense I've won them over eventually through meeting them, because I'm not an asshole. But the thing that I've written might have made them think in that moment, and maybe for several moments, that I am, and probably I was, and I've always been quite open about that. But my passion for it has always been, you have to be open to exploring all avenues of things, and you have to let people know what things bug you, not just what you love. And in saying that, if anyone came here for some tips on a blog idea they thought they had and wanted to do, if your blog is just sharing happy things in the world, now's a really good time to be doing that. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Now's an excellent time to be doing that. People need nice things, and they need to be reminded of nice things. But my process has always been around like everything that I explore, and I'm fascinated by terrible things in pop culture. I'm watching a lot of horror movies at the moment. I guess I always have, but I'm watching a lot of horror movies at the moment. And my wife walks in and out of the room and just looks at the screen and just basically shakes her head and walks out. You know, like there's just nothing said. Like why? And I guess what she's saying is, this is awful, and you kind of are too. Or why are you bothering is basically the thing. But it's like, I'm preparing myself for when I watch that horror film that is either, the original Exorcist again, or something brand new. Like, what was that great, I've forgotten the title, but that Korean film that everyone loved that came out this year that isn't really a horror film but is. Parasite. Yeah, Parasite. And I saw the black and white version of that in the movie theatre, and it was amazing. And I'm already thinking, even though I forgot the title then, I'm already thinking about how I'd like to see that again. And how I consider that a horror film, absolutely. It's an existential horror film. And my preparation for being excited about things like that is watching a 46-minute movie called Carpenter, spelled with a K, about a guy that just walks around with an axe and slices people up, and you never quite know why. And it looks like it was filmed in a weekend by people that do actually have day jobs and should have stuck to those. But I took some sort of excitement factor from seeing it. I think part of me goes, a little bit of me goes, well, I've never made a movie and I probably wouldn't do a good job, but it might be better than that. Maybe part of it's that, but it's more the idea that of creating these levels for yourself, these benchmarks. Like I don't want to roast Nick Bollinger at all. I know Nick Bollinger, and I think he's fantastic, and I think he probably really is the country's best, or certainly most dependable music reviewer over a long stretch of time. And I considered for a long time Nick to be one of my heroes. Having said all that, if I did want to say one thing about him that doesn't sit all that well with me, and I've told him this to his face, and we were interviewed on stage together in Napier a couple of years ago, and I talked about this, as no one knows what Nick doesn't like, and I don't like that myself, because it makes me not trust his recommendations, because it makes me feel like his recommendations are still in some way tied to marketing. And Pauline Kael, the famous film critic, said that the review is the only true and honest source, everything else is marketing, and I think sometimes reviews are massively tied to marketing. And probably why my career has gone the way of inverted commas is because I probably could have made a few more concessions to that, but I didn't want to. I want the stuff that I write to, it's not always going to be good, but it's always going to be true. It's always going to come true from where I'm from. I feel like I've meandered for a long, long time, so I can leave it there, and you can ask me questions if you want to, and if you just want to run, I totally understand that. But your question might prompt an angle that I should have covered and didn't, or your question might be about something else entirely, and I'm fine with either of those things.
Do you have to be on all levels of social media, i.e. Facebook, Insta, Twit, to make a successful blog, or can you get away with just starting a website and going for it?
You need to be on something, and I think my advice would be you choose the thing that you're happiest with being on, and you focus your energy there. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I was slow to move on Instagram. I don't really do much that really publicises my work on Instagram. A little bit. I took a photo of my name card today when I came in here and shared that and said that I was here. So of course I'll do things like that. But I mostly photograph road cones and put those up on Instagram because I like them. And I also, well, no, that's true. I share album covers and movie titles and things like that. But I don't share pieces of writing on Insta. And I've never been a big person on Twitter. I've got an account, and if you went and looked at my account, you would see like hundreds of thousands of tweets. But I guess for a while I was sharing the stuff that I was listening to. I saw that as an important thing. My medium's been Facebook. It's good for me. I like it. It's obviously I'm conflicted by it. I feel like I've given myself over to something that's got far more control of me. I watched that Social Dilemma movie on Netflix last night, which is exactly about this, and I recommend that. It's a very good thing to watch, and I'll probably watch it again. It won't make me delete my Facebook account, just as one of the people that's interviewed in that is a guy called Jaron Lanier, and I read his book, 10 Reasons to Delete Your Social Media, and it's a fantastic book, and I didn't delete any of my social media as a result, but I would recommend that book. It did give me things to think about. So I guess the answer is pick the one that you're going to be best at and it's going to work best for you, and do that. I hate seeing those placeholder ones though. You go to a person or a company and they've set up Twitter and they've left it there and they just don't do anything. I think you've got to have some presence on all of them. If you're going to use more than one, you've got to have a presence on it. But yeah, I mean, no one has the answers anymore with that stuff. Yeah. Yep.
It's probably a silly question. I'm not very clever on the computer. And
Neither.
and I use Facebook really only to talk to my friends and family. I don't actually know what other things Facebook does.
Well, you should keep it that way. That sounds fantastic.
But if I wanted to start a blog, and you're saying that I don't need a website. I don't understand that, because the only people who are going to see my blog at the moment
And
are
your
my
Facebook friends.
friends and family.
Well, there are a few things you can do there. You can make your posts on Facebook public, and so anyone can get to them if they might search a particular thing of interest. I think you could also test the waters by just putting up a couple of posts on your Facebook page and seeing if that's something you want to do, and judging. I mean, your friends are going to give you friend feedback. They're going to tell you it's great, and that's quite good, and it might not be wrong. But they're not going to give you true, honest feedback. Hey Mike, we were just talking about that. But friend feedback is great. But yeah, I mean, you could set up a WordPress site with all the skill that you took to set up your Facebook account. So you could do that and publish posts on a WordPress site, which is essentially a blogging site or something like that. So you could do that. You could do that. It isn't that tricky, and I've never been very good with computers. You know, I do know how to manage my site, but I've been doing it for 10 years, and I've been writing for 20 odd years, and I know how to pump out content. So those things sort of have become hardwired, but I'm not great with computers.
Which gets more interest.
So you can do a separate public page.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You could call it your blogging page.
Yeah, you could come up with a
It's
title.
public page, yeah.
You could come up with a title for what your thing's going to be about or whatever, and create that as a Facebook page.
So
And
you
that,
set up a completely different.
Yeah, set up a page.
Public page. It's called a page, it's not a personal one.
so I, for instance, have Simon Sweetman on Facebook, and you know, people can add me as their friend, and they do. But I also have Off the Tracks as a Facebook page, and everything. I mean, I do share the blogs that I write on both pages, because some people who are family and friends want to check that stuff out, but they don't. Just Off the Tracks is a very music-y driven page, so much so that if I share a podcast on Off the Tracks that I have done and it's about a poet, I will get a message from someone every week that goes, hey, this isn't about music. And I was like, well, it is actually. It's me and Ben Brown, and we're talking, and he's very musical. Just listen to him. But also, we talk about a whole bunch of music as part of the conversation, so it is. But I just write back and say to people, oh, I just share all my podcast episodes here. If you don't like them, don't click on them. That's cool. So you're always going to get someone nitpick you on something, and that's fine. Yeah. Is there a question here?
Yeah, your website. So
Yeah.
which now
Yeah.
you've been known, which gets more traffic, your website or your face?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I don't follow the Facebook stats that closely. I mean, I've got a lot of followers on Facebook. I think the page has got about 15,000 followers or so, 12 or 15,000, and the various social accounts. And I do get the statistics and I skim over them, but I don't really care for them that much. I do get the page ends up getting the hits because the page gets shared on Facebook, and so people go to the page.
Oh, okay, so people go to your website.
I share the link on Facebook, and people generally will look at that. So, it's interesting though. Like the poems, I write poems, I put them on my page, I share them. You learn all these different things with Facebook. If you really want your stuff to get read, put a picture up and write the text underneath. So I write a review of an album, and my process now is as soon as I've done it, I share and I didn't get up early enough to do one today, so it's eating at me that I haven't done content because I drove up from Wellington. I got up at 6:30 and drove up here to be here early because I heard there were heaps of traffic lights, but there aren't. I was worried about that, and I didn't want to be late. So I'll go home and I'll write some content today. I'll probably write about how well this went and what an amazing audience it was. So I'll write about that, or I'll at least be able to say one of those things. And I'll let you guess. And anyway, so when I do that, I will share that straight away. So later today, whatever I write, I'll put it on Facebook. If it's a review, it won't get looked at by many people. And then in about 2 days' time, I will take the album cover of that review and I will put that up on the Facebook page. And in the text underneath, I will share everything that I wrote in the review as a photo comment. And then in the comment underneath that, I'll put the link to the website to remind people it came from my website. But that will get far more engagement, massively. And it'll get all the comments, it'll get more likes, and it'll get shared. And it'll get a whole lot of people go, wow, I didn't know you knew about this. And it's like, not only do I know about it, I knew about it 2 days ago. I would never say that, but you know what I mean? It's like, so you can't, that's fine. So you just learn to work with, and so the same thing with the poems that I write and post on my page. Unless it has a particularly out there or provocative title, I will share the poem as a link and it will get no interest whatsoever. But then a couple of days later, or maybe a month later, I will share it as a Facebook status. I will just go, these are the words of this poem, and I'm sharing them, and it will get, well, a book deal. It will get interest. It will get interest. In my case, I've got a book coming out next month, and many of the poems started their life in some way on Off the Tracks or on Facebook or both. And they will be in the Book of Poems. And the Book of Poems, thank you for asking, is called The Death of Music Journalism, just to keep things nicely integrated. There's that. Yeah.
Do you have a big discrepancy between the number of subscribers to your WordPress site and the number of 15,000 on Facebook?
I don't know. I don't. There are people that just live there. I haven't really thought about it either, but I know, just sort of anecdotally, that there are people that, one of the funny things we have, you know how people who are scared, and I don't want to get too political, but you know how people who are scared about being microchipped by the government will often voice that on a message from their phone that's actually in their pocket, microchipping them wherever they go. Yeah. So much like that, lots of people have an energy around how they will not subscribe to your personal site because they don't want to give you that loyalty, but they are very interested in supporting you on Facebook. And to me, it seems like okay, if that's where they've heard about you and that's where they can access you, fine. But the safer thing would actually be to do the opposite. So again, I've just never been too tied up in that stuff. I don't know the answers. For years, I've had people say, I love your work, rah, 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 I love your work, and then you share a link to something and they go, oh, you got a website too. And it's like, all of this, I don't care, I think that's funny. All of this stuff is coming from there. That's where it comes from. Or I love your website, I read it all the time. How do I access your podcast? Well, if you read it all the time, you'll see that every week it's there. But you never want to get into that because suddenly you're telling the people that in some way are supporting you that they should be a bit sharper than they are. And it's like they've already reached kind of hero status in my life because they've heard of me and they like something I do. So they're like, or they'll put up with me talking at them for 90 minutes. They're instantly the greatest people in the world. Yeah. Anything else? Is that it? Oh, yeah?
I just thought it was really fascinating how you're talking about the separation of the person from their art. So your writing is your art, and then you had that horrible experience and you needed to bring yourself out of the art. And I was also wondering in terms of the artists that you write about, when you're conscious of how that blurs or how... So I was just specifically interested in that because you mentioned Lana Del Rey, whose name is not Lana Del Rey, and who's kind of like a whole curated persona.
Which I think was my big problem with her, actually. That's right. So her name's Lizzie Grant. Yeah, she released an album under the name Lizzie Grant, and I'm old enough, particularly in the context of the music reviewing game, to have actually reviewed that album and found it to be pretty pedestrian and underwhelming, just sort of bog standard acoustic guitar, female singer-songwriter stuff. Now, if you're putting an album out in this world, that's one of the worst reviews you can ever get, by the way, like just being called boring. So then, when she represented herself as this heavily curated Lana Del Rey figure, I went, she's not even real, rah, rah, rah. And then a whole lot of people said to me, well, Bob Dylan's actually called Robert Zimmerman. And it's like, I know, this blog's actually called Blog on the Tracks. There's a clue there that I know something about Bob Dylan. And again, so suddenly we're all yelling at each other about things we don't need to be yelling about. Look, it's tricky that the number one thing, or number two thing, I should say number two because of what it signifies. The number two thing that is always said about me and to me is how mean you have been about that person. And I say, well, I haven't. I've been very mean about their terrible, appalling, shitty, god-awful, dumb art. Their album sucks, their book's crap, but I'd love to have dinner with them. That's just probably not going to happen now. That's sort of where it's at. But I get that that's a really hard thing, and we live in a small country, so it's been a real, I don't know what the word is, hindrance, handicap to me that I have developed a thick skin and operated in that environment. Because I've just never wanted to be part of the industry as such. I've just wanted to, and not in any renegade way, it's like I'm just very passionate about sharing things that I'm into and learning about stuff from people. And I mean, I've never learned more about music ever than in the time I've been blogging. But when I wrote reviews, I thought I knew a whole bunch of stuff about music, and I did, and I continue to learn more because I've always been a very, very big reader, and I've always read a lot about music. And I think if you're any sort of writer and you're not reading, then you're not any sort of writer, frankly. Like, people who say, oh, I don't have time for reading, I'm too busy writing. It's like, well, then you're too busy being a shit writer. Right? Frankly, who I'm not interested in. You need to make some time. You need to make some time to read. So I was going to say earlier, like, if you're starting a blog, what's the hardest thing about starting a blog? It's not starting a blog, it's keeping a blog going. So what's the best thing you can do? Always have a book on the go, because what does a book do? Not only do you learn from it and feel comfort from it, but it gives you something to write about. Just writing 3 lines going to the world, hey, look, I came here today, look at what a dickhead I am. I came here today to have this chat with you guys, and I brought 3 books with me. And I'm going to get here, and I'm going to leave here and I'm going to drive home. And I'm a good driver, so I'm not going to read while I drive. But just in case something happened, in fact, I bought, and I'm going to lose the room now because I bought 3 books and a Kindle, so I bought about 8,000 books. So my Kindle's just always in my bag. My books, I've got Pocket Blues by Bob Gorky, who's a New York poet. He sent me that book this week, so I haven't even started that. I Am a Human Being by Jackson Newland. They're a wonderful poet, and I've nearly finished that, so that's part of the reason I brought another book. And I am reading this, which is pretty cool, and actually this is a pretty good thing that's relevant. This is, how do you say his name? Chuck Palahniuk. He wrote Fight Club. And this book is called Consider This, Moments in My Writing Life After Which Everything Was Different. So this is like a writing memoir, and it's brand new. I got this from the J. Law Library, and I've nearly finished this too. And he has some excellent writing tips about creative writing. He talks a lot about how to build characters and stuff. And I got it because I have been, a little bit of a fan of some of his work, and then I got very bored by him. But I thought, man, he's really successful, and he's got a really singular voice. It'd be really interesting to hear what his tips are and how he's a very wise speaker about writing. He uses a lot of examples from classic novels, and then he also uses a lot of examples which I love from films, and talks about how if you're a writer of fiction, watching films is a fantastic thing to do, because
What's his name?
his name, I'm going to spell it for you, because his name, I've heard his name pronounced so many different ways. Chuck, I know that bit, that's easy, but that's C-H-U-C-K, as we've always known. But his surname is, I think it's Palahniuk, is how it's actually said, but I've heard people say Palahniuk and Palahniuk, but it's P-A-L-A, and then this is the tricky bit, H-N-I-U-K. So that's where things get a little bit like, oh, how do we say this? But imagine having to bring him on as a speaker. Hey everyone, it's Chuck they would just wander off a bit, like. So I bought those up, and I probably won't read any of them. But one of my heroes that I met in recent life is this woman who, you won't know her. She is the stepmother of my sister-in-law. And so my brother got married to this English woman, and the parents, her dad and her stepmom, came up to our house. And I love this story. They came up to our house in a rental car, and they visited my parents and us and everything like that a couple of days before the wedding. And then they went to drive off, and the car overheated as soon as they turned it on and went around the turning bay at my parents' house. And my dad sells cars, or used to sell cars, so not only does that make him a villain, but he thinks he's a bit of a mechanic. So he's out there going, I could probably fix this, or better, sell you a new one. And so he's doing that, and the English guy, the dad, who knows nothing, gets out, kind of kicks the tyres and pretends he's a man who knows manly things, because he thinks that's what I've got to do. And the woman, the stepmom, sits in the car, leaves her seatbelt on, reaches into the glove compartment, pulls out a novel and starts reading. And I said to Katie, and Katie was like, how awesome is that? And I was like, we've had our chat with her, we're not going to see her again, much. She was nice, we were nice. I love that she just thought, I'm a minus here in any other situation. I can't fix the car, I can't diagnose anything, but I can get a few pages in. And I was just like, what an absolute hero of a person, isn't that? If you leave here with one tip, it's carry a book with you everywhere in case your car breaks down. I think about that often. Isn't it a revelation, Mary, that that's not a poem yet? In my life, and the sorts of poems that I write, that hasn't come up, but maybe now it will. But I just think, what a hero, what an absolute inspiration.
Would it be fair to say to be a blogger, you need a lot of words in you? You're gonna. Most people would probably run out of stuff.
Yeah, well, as I say, the hardest thing isn't starting a blog, it's carrying it on. Like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it's also like, I guess other things come up, like knowing when to stop on a particular piece too. Like, I've just always felt like, the consistency is I'll turn up every day, that's the consistency. But the variation within that is that one day, when I was doing the Stuff blog, they wanted them to be 600 to 800 words. And it's just like, I'm not being hemmed in by that shit. Some days I'll write 300, most days I'll write 1,500. If you're going to get 7,000 words from me, you're going to get them and you're going to publish them. And if people don't read them, they can let people know they don't by writing, TL, DR. And that just makes them look like a dweeb, not me. So that's how we're going to play this game. Now, none of that was actually said, but that was sort of my attitude. But it's like, things find their groove. People, the number one question when someone comes around for a podcast with me is, how long is this going to go for? You are going to edit it, right? And I go, yeah, we'll edit it if we need to. I always listen to the back. If one of us starts sounding really dumb, we'll edit it to make ourselves sound better. But mostly the idea is it's an organic conversation, and they usually all line up at being between 70 and 90 minutes because we have a big chat. It's usually me, if not meeting someone for the first time, then we're certainly talking about the things we're talking about for the first time. But in saying that, the longest podcast I ever did was 3 hours and 10 minutes, and the shortest one was 17. So there's this wonderful range, and there's lots that are 2 hours and lots that are 45 minutes. And again, I like that. Somewhere in me is the idea that a person's turning up and looking at the podcast and going, I will listen to that one now because it's only 30 minutes and I've got 30 minutes. And the one thing I don't want to be in people's, and people are podcasting as a whole separate topic, but the one thing that happens with people with podcasts, and I'm obsessed with podcasts, and the only thing that's wrong with them is they eat into your reading time. That's the only thing that's wrong with them. Other than that, they're wonderful. Yeah. They're perfect. They're great for putting on headphones when you're cooking a meal or something like that. And you just want information and catching up with a voice that has become your friend. And I walk everywhere when I'm living in Wellington. When I'm in the city, I walk everywhere and I never listen to music. I always listen to podcasts. But some people go, they know that Mark Maron's podcast is basically always 100 minutes, so they plan around that. Well, I love the idea that I'm kind of messing with people's planned podcast time. You know, I don't have 2 hours to listen to you and Richard Langston talk non-stop at each other about poetry and music, which we did. But I do have 40 minutes to listen to Suzanne Vega, because I can't believe Suzanne Vega's on a New Zealand podcast. And it's like, I didn't. I can't believe that either. So I like that it's making people go up and down the timeline. I imagine. I certainly see that because I do track who listens to what with that and what the numbers are. I track that a little bit more because that's new to me and interesting. And it's amazing to see what hits. The number one podcast that I've done is not Suzanne Vega in terms of listenership, and it's not any of the internationals. It's a person no one's really ever heard of. It's a woman called Jana LeBlanc who lived in Wellington. She's a model. And her claim to fame is, I guess, she was the fiancée of Stevie Ray Vaughan, the famous blues guitarist, and she was his fiancée when he died in a helicopter crash. And she published a book of photographs. They were going to be married, and the crazy story there was that he was going to move to Wellington, and right now he'd be like a 60-year-old man playing in blues bars in Wellington. But he got in the wrong helicopter. And what's even sadder about that is he got in the helicopter and Eric Clapton didn't. Oh. No, just kidding. Just kidding. You know, but there's a little element of truth in that. But I met Jana once because she read a blog I did about how much I love Stevie Ray Vaughan, and she sent me this beautiful message saying, I never write to people, but something about the way you capture Stevie Ray Vaughan appealed to me, and maybe it's because you live in Wellington and that's where I was from. I'm in New York, but I'm coming over in a couple of weeks. Would you like to meet? And I was like, yeah, I'll meet you. So went and had a coffee, and we stayed in touch, had this nice chat, and she told me about the night that he died. And she recounted the story of everything and how she had just moved all of their stuff into a new apartment, and it was officially that they were going to be together and live together in this apartment in New York, and she was tired from moving and waiting, and then she woke up to a phone call telling her this awful news. So she told me that, and I thought, what a privilege to hear that story. What a bugger she didn't let me record it because I'm a journalist. But I also went, you know, I never would have, there's no way I would. So we stayed in touch for several years, and then she wrote to me and said, I'm actually putting a book out of photographs of me and Stevie from the time, and I'd like to send you a copy, and great, and I reviewed it. And then she messaged and said, I'm actually coming back, I'm going to be in town. It'd be great to meet up. And I said, well, here's something. You don't have to say yes, but would you like to be on the podcast? We'll plug the hell out of your book, and you can choose what parts of your story you tell. And now you're an international catwalk model, so I'm interested in talking to you about that. I do not want to frame it as you are Stevie Ray Vaughan's girlfriend, but whatever. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. Now, somewhere along the line, some blues guitar person has grabbed that and put that on a fan forum. And I know this because you can see where things end up. And so that went through the roof, and it's by far the most successful podcast. And so it is the Stevie Ray Vaughan connection that's made that happen. But what I like is that we get this amazing story of her, and she's so good at telling it, and she's rebuilt, I think she was 19 when it happened. You know, he was 30-something and she was 19. And she's rebuilt this life. She's got a husband and 2 kids, and in fact has just moved to, if you all want to stalk her, she's just moved back to Auckland after years in Florida because of coronavirus. She's just got back into the country and just done her managed isolation. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Isn't it? It's fascinating. I find that stuff fascinating. So when you have experiences like that, how to go back and pretend that I'm answering that question and that was all part of it, to how could you run out of things to write about? You know, like when you wake up in the morning and you remember that, like you might not write about that, if that's going to trigger something. You know, I seem to, because the only reason I know that she's in Auckland is 2 weeks ago it was the 30th anniversary of Steve Ray Vaughan's death, and I wrote to her and said, hey, you know, how you doing? I guess I'm, you know, I don't know how to frame it, but I basically said, you know, I guess I'm thinking of you today, how are you? And she took a few days to reply, and then she said, actually, of all the anniversaries of his passing, this was the easiest one, funnily enough, to not be too concerned about. That's because I was travelling over the international date line. Me and my boys are just in our managed quarantine. We're moving back to Auckland. We're a bit embarrassed to have been in Florida for as long as we are under Trump's rule. Can't handle it. Coronavirus and his handling of that is the final straw, you know, rah, rah, rah. So come back to New Zealand. So again, like, not that I'm going to go, I'm just telling you that, I'm not going to publish that, but all of these things feed into your experience. So when I next listen to a Stevie Ray Vaughan album, I have a whole, you know, it's a bit like that Peter Gabriel song, I have a whole new context for how I listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan. How can I not?
I hope this isn't too personal, but as a writer, what is the thing you like most about yourself, and what is the thing that you dislike most about yourself?
Wow. What do I like most about myself?
As a writer, not
As a writer,
not
as a person. Oh God,
yeah,
that's
no,
not easy.
no.
There's so much.
No, otherwise that was a mean question.
No, it wasn't a mean question. But how am I going to nail it down to just one? As a writer, I like that I turn up. You know, one of my notes that I wrote down for myself to say here, but didn't, but will now, is that there's my own maxim that I think I came up with, and if someone else came up with it first, that's fine. But the thing that I have always told myself is, you can't win on the internet. You know how people go, that wins the internet today, and they usually talk about a stupid meme, and in that context they're right, and the prize is someone you don't know saying they liked your work that you stole from someone else. So that just proves you haven't won anything. But you can't win on the internet. All you can do is turn up, and that's sort of been my advice to myself. Like, you're not going to win, but you're going to turn up, and the prize is longevity. The prize is a track record. That all of this has to mean something someday. You know. And I have had people write to me, most times when someone writes to me and says they like something I've said, it's usually couched in some sort of, at first you said Lana Del Rey was terrible and I disagreed, and then you had the gall to say Robbie Williams can't sing. But I found out that you like Stevie Ray Vaughan, and I found out that you're a fan of horror films, and I found out that you like poetry. And this connection happens, and it's like, I think that's wonderful, because when you meet someone, you don't usually go, you look like a bit of a dick when you walked across the room, actually, but now you seem okay. But we're all thinking that sometimes. Yeah. You know, you see someone, wouldn't it be cool if you could say that? But you can't. And when you write stuff, people say that about your writing, and in a way I quite like that. So what I like about myself is I turn up. What I don't like about myself is I've never been able to make a full-time living or even a half-time living writing. And that has always bugged me a little bit. And my answer to that, and I don't mean that in an entitled sort of we should pay writers more, you know, rah, rah, rah thing. I'm just sort of like, what am I going to do? I've shared my whole life with people forever. I've worked my ass off. And I've also suffered the partial indignity of people thinking that I get paid a whole lot more than I have to do these things. So Robbie Williams, you know, and then the poem that I wrote talks about it, that, you know, I think I made $60 out of Robbie Williams, out of saying he was terrible. Was that worth it for, you know, my photo and my son's photo to go? But, you know, my son was 4, he was 5 months old in the photo, but he was 4 when it got shared, and so he was still in childcare, and so daycare, and so all the mums in daycare became my friend, because suddenly I was vulnerable, and I wasn't like the fucking weird dad ogre that looked like a beast that walked across the room funny and didn't like Lana Del Rey. Suddenly I was a vulnerable dude who, you know, was approachable. So I made some friendships out of it. So that's got to be worth something.
Thank you for your honesty. That was a mean question.
No, it's a good question. It's a fair question. Yeah. Anything else? I should let you go. You all look like you're sitting here going, when do we get out of here? Me too. I've got these books to read, so I need to drive home fast. Thank you very much. If you want to come up up and whisper your question because you hate your voice talking loudly. I'll hang around for a bit. Yeah, of course.
With all those roundabouts, it's just one easier and have.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, we will. Thank you. That's awesome. We're doing a massive garden replanting. Awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's a sad story too, wasn't it? But, yeah, we're really cool to see a couple of things. Yeah, nice one. Thank you.
That was great.
Yeah, it's all right? Yes. Yes.
Oh my God. I was with Stephen Colston got one.
Oh, you did. Yeah, well, because we're just replanting our garden.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So, do you know Renee?
Oh, no, I don't. Hello, nice to meet you. Oh, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Because Renee blogs every
Yeah.
So you're both bloggers.
Yeah, I love Rachel's blog too.
Yeah.
I
I know, it's cool. And same thing, Renee,
Yeah.
every Wednesday.
Yeah, I've seen.
Writes it on Tuesday, comes out every
No, I've
Wednesday.
read some of her
It's
stuff.
regular ads. It was so good.
Good, it was fun.
Oh my God, it was so entertaining.
good.
You're like an act. You're not an author up there. You're an
well,
actor.
that's true.
You're so good.
First
It
one.
was so engaged.
Oh, good.
I wish
Yeah.
someone had recorded. You didn't record
No,
yourself.
God, no. I like these things to just exist.
Oh,
I said, Katie was like, aren't you stressed? Have you prepped? And I was like,
felt like you had. Like,
I wrote some notes down when I was watching Tom,
yeah.
but I didn't really refer to them much. But I was like, I wanted a bit of
so
a
good.
bit of an idea of how
It was
to have.
very cool. I took a few notes. I
Oh,
had to take
good.
some photos. I can
Yeah.
have a photo if you like.
Sweet. Yeah.
For your visual.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
Let me know.
yeah, I will. But Rachel Ray did an interview with me.
No, she did.
And I feel like that kind of helped. That basically helped me work out. Well, I should talk about this stuff. Yeah.
Nice. I'll leave you to talk.
That's right, I just wanted to say, I think I used to hear you on Radio New Zealand.
Oh yeah,
Nice
I still do that. I still do that. I still do. Yeah, I should. I do news once a month, and I do a feature like big talk about something. Still music. So like last night we talked about covers, and play some of these songs. Like 40-minute chat about the songs. So I've done things like the Beatles. Nice. Yeah, no, it's fun, though. No, so I'll probably be doing it.
You sound busy.
So you know
Yes.
Like that full time.
No, well, you've got to it's good. Yeah. It's all my choice. It's easy to pull back when you need to.
Oh, that's nice, yeah. Nice.
Yeah, you too. Yeah.
Great stuff, Simon.
Oh, yeah,
Really
great.
good. Tell me, have you revised your opinion at all of Elvis Hardy?
Yeah,
The live event, your last
I
album?
have actually liked the last album a lot, but what I couldn't be bothered doing, and I did bother doing it with Lana Del Rey, but what I found, and I think the thing for me was just the New Zealand artist and how heavy people felt I went on her. If you turn around and go, you know, I like this, and here's why, and you have to do a full mea culpa, and you go, you have to go, I guess I got that wrong. Or what I did with Lana Del Rey was I shared the links to all the other ones and stuff. I'm not saying I got these wrong. They're how I felt at the time. They're not how I feel now. Maybe I could have said it better, but I'm not that interested in this music, but I love listening as one. It's this huge, you know, and I did get a good response. I did get a lot of people going, that's how you do it. But I still got a few people going, no, you're just trying to appear cool because she's cool. And I made a decision with Elvis Harding. I'm actually not going to talk about the new album because it's just going to get sabotaged by people going, oh, now you think she's good? You don't mean it? You're doing anything to get read? And I just decided I'm just going to leave it, but I'm not going to talk it down. And I thought the new album was really good. I liked it.
I really like it.
And what I might do, because I did this with Lana Del Rey, and because it went so well, is I might write something about Aldous Harding now, or in a month, now down the track. But that was my thinking at the time. And it happened with some. Well, my experience with it first was I went in so hard and heavy on Fat Freddy's Drop when they first came out that I had this. Well, I thought it was a pretty funny review of them live, and they put the first album out, and I hadn't said anything about it, but I crushed them about this live gig, and it was probably the first stuff blog that really blew up. It just went everywhere and had hundreds of comments, and then. And Moo from the band went on Kim Hill and called me a racist and said he just doesn't like black music. And Kim Hill went to town on him and scolded him and said, well, for a start, you make brown music, you're not black. You make brown music. I only know this because someone sent it to me and I listened to it, and it was amazing. And then she fully had my back, and she was like, and secondly, if you read him, he is the only person in the Dog Post that regularly covers hip-hop and soul music. And so I would argue that he actually does like black music, and that he does like brown music, and that he's done his listening. Could it be, in her way, she said, could it be that he just does not like your, something like, it was just wonderful, just absolutely perfect. So she fully had my back, and he was like, oh, well, I think he's just blown his wad too early because our new album's out soon and it's a cracker. So I listened to the new album and I had this moment where I pulled over and I was like, fuck, this is really good. And I'm going to have to say so. And I did. And for the life of me, it just got disappeared off the internet. I can't find it. I've got the Word file, I wrote it, it happened, it got a few comments, and then somehow, it's just not searchable, and it's gone. And it was like, it was a real kind of weird parable to me that we don't like our critics to take back their words, we can't handle it, we want an enemy, we want a villain. So those things have been really instructive.
Right, so you're thinking twice, of course.
But I am thinking twice, it's really interesting you brought that up, because I am thinking about it with her, I'm like, I totally, not so much got that wrong, but the new album appeals to me when the other one did not.
I suppose I like Aldous Harding.
And people do.
I like that first one, but I really like the second one, the latest. However, I think what it is was your, and you must have known this was your image.
Oh,
of the Strangled Gold.
Oh, totally. No, and it drew so much from people.
But the writer in you just thinks, damn it all, there's a great image.
I just find that stuff kind of funny, and it's that, and it's also, it's a comment on what people think is cool, because I've done that thing 3 times, I've done that kind of play 3 times, and the first time I did it with the lead singer from the Feelers, and he released a solo album, and I said the whole album just sounds like this, and embedded a clip of a horse rolling over and just farting for about, giant, long, loud, presumably smelly horse fart. Dead air from any corner except for his wife, who wrote to me and said, you're playing with people's lives here, how dare you? And I wrote back and said, look, it's just a joke, and I don't like your husband's music. She was like, if it's just a joke, take it down. I said, I actually really don't like your husband's music. If you want me to take it down, I'll write a review that's far more aggressive in my tone around why I don't like his music. If I were you, I'd just handle the gender. It's just sort of a joke. And she was like, oh, I can't, it ended okay. She was like, well, I don't think that's very funny, but okay, all the best. And I was like, yeah, you too. And that was that. But dead air. No, so no one was going, oh, how you're a mean guy for doing this. But with Aldous Harding, she was the sacred.
Oh, she was.
She was the golden.
She was a sacred goat. And the sacrifice was not welcome. Yeah. I was just saying with that, like I did the same thing with the lead singer from the Feelers when he did a solo album, and I did like a video clip of a horse farting, and dead air, pungent dead air, like no one said a thing, no one, and so like I sort of knew what I was doing there, that I was having a bit of fun with like the whole cool crowd aspect of like and I also Joe Bonamassa, who's a blues rock guitarist of middling talent. He's very talented, but I don't find it very musical. To me, he's like one of the bad things that came out of Stevie Ray Vaughan. I did a similar thing with him, dead air, because it's like he's just old dad rock for 60-year-olds that think they like blues, but just like white guys doing the blues. So he's got his audience, and they don't read me.
His eldest is.
Yeah, so she was. super cool and sacred, and everyone wanted, and so it was a little bit of a comment on that, and it sort of had its mark in that sense. And I did feel a little mean about it every now and then. No, well, I was sort of saying her sound, and so people took it personally. The thing that came up was people saying, you've compared her to a goat, and I think she looks like a goat. This is sexist, you would never do that to a man. It's like, well, arguably I said the guy from the lead singer from Feelers looked like a horse on his back farting.
Yeah, so that could be seen as
So
worse.
that could be seen as worse, but
Yes.
you all didn't see that, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, you must have quite a thick skin, Simon, because there was a chap, Tim O'Brien, I think, Tim O'Brien, and he used to do drama criticisms of Wellington reviews, but he said in the end that he just couldn't.
Oh, they all give it up.
Because he couldn't go to
small country, small scene, and whatever scene it is.
Cost too much. It's the same with film reviewing, and
if you're going to be honest, if you're going to be honest.
No, totally. Totally. Oh, yeah. No, she's the Nick Bollinger of culture. She's absolutely amazing. Everything about her is good. The service that she's doing is phenomenal in a dead industry. There's no competitors. But why couldn't you criticise something every now and then? Yeah, of course, you have to.
Is that your phone? What's on the ground?
Yeah.
It's just lying there.
I have my drink bottle down there.
When are you guys up? Not tonight, late?
After lunch. It's 1 o'clock.
We're up at 1.
Oh,
so I've got a scone.
And then 3
I can
as well.
split it with you
Oh,
if you
no,
want.
you have your scone.
Are you
I'll
sure?
go get something, yeah.
And we're good, aren't we? We just follow our rather rough
Yes.
outline.
Well done, Simon. That was so
thanks.
Wasn't it
so
good?
entertaining.
Good.
Wasn't it
It's
great?
great. I thought maybe this is what Mary's going to do in the next session.
No way.
Do you know,
Who could
it's a
compete
weird
with
job.
that?
There's nothing better than a bunch of people all publishing on the same label telling you you're great.
Oh,
For it to really mean something.
I know.
Thank you so much.
It's very meaningful. I know.
Including your actual publisher. Thank you. That just means the world.
You are right. You're right. Okay. Yes. We knew that.
But I appreciate it, and send me a photo.
Okay, I'll send you. I've definitely got you in action, chatting
Oh,
like that.
right. Yeah.
Full on.
National Geographic.
Oh yeah. I've got to go and get my scone. Yeah.
Is the poetry on now?
No, it's on at 1 o'clock. Now, so
It's just 12:28.
So Renee, so I'm going to go get my scone from the car. Should we go through? We can just eat our scones through here. I'm just really happy to split mine with you.
No, I'll go and be really healthy, get a little something next
Because we
door.
did have a good breakfast.
McDonald's.
Oh, go you.
Yes, I'm never allowed normally.
No, I don't. When you're away.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I can do that. What else do I need to do? So every chair, like every surface. Oh, just broken. Do.